It was not true during the 70s, probably not even true in '68, when Nixon got elected and beat Humphrey, although that was only the first sign of the change. And it was obviously not true by 1980 when Ronald Reagan beat Carter. But I didn't actually come to a conclusion that it was the wrong approach until 1984. I remember writing a memo, and I think I've shared it with you, before Mondale went down to defeat in '84, that began by saying the Democratic Party has finally nominated a candidate who believes everything we believe. He believes in an activist government, he believes in a progressive taxation system, he believes in the social policies that we agree with, he has a foreign policy that we're comfortable with, and he's about to lose 49 out of 50 states. And if that's true, we are wrong. We need a different messenger, we need a different message, we need to completely reshape the Democratic Party nationally and therefore in the state of Michigan. But that was not until 1984. So during the 1970s, my fight was to try and keep intact and energize, keep intact through unity, working together to win, and energized with the right candidates, with the right kind of messages and political programs and policies, the old coalition.
And does Blanchard, in your mind, I don't know whether it would have been clear at the time or subsequently, foreshadow some of what a next coalition would win with, or was he, in your view, the last one to win essentially with the New Deal coalition?
Well, that's a very good question. I think when we were busy recruiting Blanchard, we did so because he had proven to be an effective vote getter with the suburban constituency. He represented, I think, well, he represented southeast Oakland County and a whole bunch of Warren and the Macomb County area around it, as I recall his district back then, and it defeated a Republican candidate in the process. Well, that was scandal-tinged election in '74. But I think it was no more than, oh well, he can help us carry the suburbs. Mm-hmm. I don't think it was coalition politics necessarily. But I do know that after he got elected in '82, and in order to take the state out of the deficit it faced, raised income taxes, costing the Democrats the majority they had elected in the state Senate through a couple of recall petitions, that he and I had a conversation about what are we going to do now. Remember, I'm not in his government. I never was. He and I remained very close political allies. He attended the very first meeting of the officers of the Michigan Democratic Party after my election. He was there representing Attorney General Frank Kelly, and we met and stayed friends forever after that, and relied on him for political advice all the time. And I helped orchestrate some of the Democratic primary in his congressional situation. But I remember after that sort of really difficult time for him, after he got elected governor, and the tax issue had passed, but he still had to deal with the aftermath of it, and Democrats were starting to get recalled, we talked about what we should do and what he should do. And I suggested that he think of a policy and program set that would be surprising coming from a Democrat. And that if he wanted to establish his credentials for his reelection and for his governance, he ought to come across as different than your regular Democrat. Now, nobody had heard of the New Democrats of Bill Clinton at the time, although Bill was a friend of Blanchard's. And that all didn't take place until 86, 87, 88. But we did, in fact, put together a program where Blanchard was aggressive on welfare fraud. He was in favor of more parental involvement and responsibility in the world of education. He got involved in through you as well, in the government as a venture capitalist, if you will, to try and stimulate economic development. And all of these things were part of that first conversation about you'll get headlines that'll be good headlines if you do things that Democrats aren't expected to do. Don't be a Republican, but do things Democrats aren't expected to do. So in that way, he foreshadowed some of that.
So at that point, to a great degree, then, your involvement in politics really becomes much more national and not very Michigan focused. Is that
Well,
fair?
two things going on. When I left the Michigan Democratic Party, I was fortunate enough to get a job with Michigan Bell, which turned into a job with AT&T, which became a 2-decade career for me.
But outside the state.
No, I was here in Detroit all of that time. Well, I left in '92 to go to Los Angeles, but during that first decade, it was all in Michigan. And I was on the Democratic National Committee, so I was very much involved nationally. But my role in the Michigan world was really around Blanchard. Blanchard used me as his sounding board when he didn't want to talk to people who work for him and therefore might have their opinion colored by the need to hang on to their job or play whatever internal game was being played. Not that that ever happens amongst his cabinet members and whatever. I was kind of this objective outsider who could tell it to him straight.
Can you remember a few, you mentioned initially how to respond after this very difficult recall period. Can you remember a few other issues where you were sort of engaged to help figure out
Well,
what
the
to
one
do?
I remember the most was amongst all the other difficulties that, I mean, his governorship first year wasn't as bad as my first year as party chairman, but it wasn't a historical great thing. I remember we were up in Mackinac Island, and and I think it was the first time I'd visited the governor's residence there, and he told me privately that Tom LaWand, who had been his campaign chairman and is a very close friend, was not working out as chief of staff. Not Jim, but one of the cabinet members said that the problem Tom had was that as a lawyer, he had been used to handling things sequentially. And as chief of staff, you have to handle 100 things all at the same time. For whatever reason, Jim was dissatisfied with his performance, and he was unable, from a friendship and personal basis, to tell Tom that, even though all kinds of people in the administration were telling him this, and he was agreeing with him. So he said, rather than anybody else getting blamed for it, would you mind me going to tell Tom that it's not working out? And I said, you want me to say anything else? He said, yeah, no, just tell him it's not working out. And so I did. I called Tom and I took him to lunch. I think we were on Mackinac Island. Maybe it was after I came back, and said, I have a message to convey that you're not going to want to hear, but I want to convey it as it was told to me. He said, what's that? I said, Blanchard says it's not working out. And Tom says, what does that mean? I said, well, now, he didn't say this, but what I think it means is he wants you to leave. And he did. And they hired somebody else as chief of staff. So, yeah.
Clearly one of the challenges as you go into '82 is to recruit a candidate who can win with what may be starting to be the beginning of a shifting coalition. But so how do you end up, how does Blanchard finally emerge as that candidate?
Well, I had been, in the course of my chairmanship, convening groups that were kitchen cabinet more than official. And later on, you joined one of those conversations. But in that particular time period, I was no longer party chairman. So we organized something that we called the Garden Club, which is kind of amusing, but the coded invitation was all about growing flowers in our garden, which really referenced candidates. And there were some labor guys there, certainly my old mentor, John, my supporter, Sam Fishman, but people like Betty Howe had served in the Blanchard administration. Macomb County was represented probably by John Bruff. Bruce Miller was still a part of it. So some of the people who went back to my original activity.